And we are live.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the inaugural stream of a brand new boxing podcast, which is a joint collaboration between myself, Corruption in Boxing, probably already shrouded in infamy on the YTBC scene for a number of years, started off doing sort of hangouts of very early fights back in Japan, featuring Roman Gonzalez when he was coming up, Kazuto Ioka, and a lot of other fighters as well. But then subsequently moving on various different channels, eventually setting up my own channel. But it's been kind of a little bit off and on. So the impetus was there. And my co-conspirator is none other than the cerebral Serbian scientist, official scorecard boxing science. Official?
Oh yeah, thank you for the nice introduction. I'm super glad we are finally able to start this podcast, and I'm looking forward to it because, like I told you, I'm I'm a fan number one of this podcast because since I discovered your channel, I've honestly I've been blown out because in many ways we are thinking and we are seeing the fights and boxing pretty much the similar way. So yeah, what can I say about it? If you guys know me, I like to do the breakdowns, same as Corruption, the predictions, and go really deep into it, just as him.
Yeah, absolutely. Because a lot of people probably wondering why the sort of affiliation with Official, and sort of why yet another boxing podcast, just becoming a bit of a cliche given the sort of plethora of podcasts that are already out there in existence and how many are just forthcoming all the time. But the way Official and myself look at it is that, 90% of them are just standard sort of blueprint, pretty mundane. And, so I was thinking, apart from the obvious sort of admiration that we have for each other's body of work, but there's a definite synergy which you alluded upon. And that's really the modus operandi for this podcast, the coup d'etat of boxing, because we're attempting to crack down on the conventional deep state of boxing. We basically were about, detail. None of us are really about, being succinct or just short, concise summaries. That's not really our style of, expressing our, our thought processes. It's about being detailed. It's about depth. It's about being scientific, and it's about futuristic ideas. So the coup d'etat is really a contemporary take on an old classic sport. What do you say?
I could not say it any better than you. So you just explained everything, and pretty much set up the tone for this and all the future streams that we are going to do together. And yeah, by the way, just to remind the people, it's gonna well, it's happening every Sunday at the same time, so you have the time and the day to find us and hopefully enjoy the conversation between us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're not sort of too focused on every single fight informing the general sort of boxing community about news and results and sort of speculation on fights, etc. No, it's about significant fights to us that, maybe there's polarizing opinion regarding it, or fights that will, potentially have an impact on certain other fights, or will affect boxing as a whole. And I think that brings us on to the fight that's pretty central to this, opening show. None of us, I don't think neither of us did a post-fight video on the significant fight which took place last week, which I think is, convenient because the fallout from, the Jose Carlos Ramirez and Viktor Postol fight, it's a very polarizing fight in terms of the divided opinions, and it brings us on to one of the concepts in which has been on my mind for a number of years, and it's almost like challenging our perception of what boxing is now. The purists will always think that, boxing is about, inflicting damage, and that should be reflected in the scorecards. But boxing as a sport has changed so much since its inception. In its early roots, it was barbarism, it was brutality. In sort of very, very early days in sort of Nubia, where they were boxing, the Egyptians used to steal the boxers from the Nubians to entertain the pharaohs and their people. So over the years, as rules and regulations have come in, boxing is not only about that. It's the safety mechanism has come in a lot more. We've seen the introduction of gloves, etc. Rules, the Marquess of Queensberry rules, and everything has changed since. rounds have been severely restricted, and now we're down to 12 rounds of boxing, with clearly defined scorecards. The introduction of gloves was essentially implemented because of the amount of eye damage that was being sustained through sort of clenched fists. So boxing has definitely evolved, and it's not, in my sort of perception, it's not what it once was. So and that I think personifies very much the polarizing opinion in the scoring of this fight, because a lot of the negativity regarding the fight was that Viktor Postol was too negative, and he was personifying an amateuristic style of boxing. And that's something I want to discuss with yourself, official. Your sort of perceptions on the fight, as well as mine, and how that tallies into the overarching argument of what is boxing now? Is it nostalgic to what it once was, or is it very much now a contest of skill and fighters who embody the sweet science of landing shots and avoiding shots and using the ring as Viktor Postol clearly does? Or should he be penalized for fighting in that sort of specific style? Or should he be there standing and trading, because he's obviously a skilled pugilist, and we have many different styles of boxing. Jose Ramirez is obviously a pressure fighter. He's about activity, he's about work rate. So why should Viktor Postol play into his hands and stand there and trade and risk being knocked out, if he can instead almost counter that strategy like he was doing, and implementing a smart strategy of utilizing his height and reach and boxing and using the ring and frustrating Ramirez, almost making him one-dimensional at times, landing significant shots. But unfortunately, we look at the scorecard of the fight. Dave Moretti had the bout at 114 apiece, a draw. Tim Cheatham scored the bout 115, 113 for Jose Ramirez. And Steve Weisfeld scored the bout 116 to 112 for Jose Ramirez. So a majority decision for Ramirez, 2 points, maybe a 7-5 on Cheatham's card, and an 8-4 on Steve Weisfeld's card. So not surprising, official. Jose Ramirez, undefeated, unified champion WBC, WBO, a top ranker fighter fighting on the ESPN platform, American. His parents were obviously Mexican immigrants, so he's very well revered in sort of Fresno, California, where he does a tremendous amount of work for the community. So he's obviously built up a large following with Californians, first generation Mexicans, as well as those that have migrated to America. So the community comes out and supports him. He tends to sell out Fresno, California. He was getting 12, 14,000 attendance on these fights even before he won the WBO belt. So Top Rank have obviously realized that he's a ticket seller. He's a money machine for them. So is it a case, official, that Ramirez is, you could argue, once again a recipient of an A-side decision? or are the scorecards justifiable in terms of the way the fight played out? Because I think Tim Bradley and Andre Ward, who are the two sort of color commentators on the ESPN podcast, the ESPN platform, both of them made striking comments, which Tim Bradley at one point was saying that Jose Ramirez was giving up too much space to Viktor Postol. Now, if there's significant space between the two fighters, well, how can Viktor Postol be running then? To me, that's a case that Jose Ramirez was reticent to cut the distance, because he's a fighter who is very tall as well, around sort of 5'10". Viktor Postol definitely taller, maybe by an inch and a half. But the Ramirez is not really he's not really that efficient on the outside. He likes to come in at mid-range, even get in shorter, and he's prone for them sort of wide punches, very, very good left hook. But Postol, from the fight that I saw, he didn't have to exert too much pressure to maintain distance and range, and obviously pivot off after his jabs and just try and mix up his movements to confuse Ramirez. Because I think what Ramirez does for me, official, I've noticed a definite defect in the way he tries to manipulate the distance to get in close. He tends to sort of drop his arms to sort of 3/4 range, and then he comes forward, a little bit of side-to-side movement with his head, but then he stops, brings up his hands, stone dead stops to obviously gauge and look at the target, and then he drops his hands and then comes forward again. So what Postol was doing, he was trying to target Ramirez both at the point in which his hands were at 3/4, hitting him with the jab. And Viktor Postol's jab is not a rangefinder, because he really puts his left shoulder into the punch, and at times his body is definitely arcing over on the left-hand side, and he dips his head as well on the left. So he's definitely prone to counter punches, but it reinforces that it's not an amateurish style that Postol is adopting. He's not blessed with excessive power, only sort of 12 knockouts, and his last knockout was, I think, 5 years ago against Lucas Matisse. But that knockout was more due to Matisse suffering a fracture of his orbital eye socket. Now, and a very similar situation to Kell Brook, and when that happens during the fight, the way a fighter's going to react, he's going to be worried about his eye, and you can't blame a fighter for not having the gumption to sort of continue, because who knows, one more significant blow to the eye and your eye could be irrevocably damaged. So it's that unknown at that point. So that knockout was, although Postol was applying good pressure, but if there wasn't a significant a fracture in that fight, Postol may not have accrued a knockout. So that power still might be a little bit superficial. But saying that, Jose Ramirez, to me, never landed a significant power punch up until the 7th round, where he caught Postol at short range on the inside with a beautiful sort of short left hook, after Postol was trying to do the 1-2, but Ramirez finally was able to use a little bit of upper body movement to try and slip the long raking jabs on the outside, and the 1-2 that Postol was trying to do straight through the middle. So there was a great sort of contrast of styles against a beautiful sort of smart, elegant boxer, textbook, straight down the middle, good 1-2s, very good left hook as well, but not an inside fighter. and not a prodigious body puncher, if not at all. But Ramirez I thought, had a little bit more versatility in his attacks. Does attack the head and the body, combination punches, but at times at the fight, it was too much one punch, then being stationary, not enough sustained action. And I don't think neither fighter was able to exert their will and apply that dominance where a judge can say unequivocally, yeah, Ramirez won that round. It was only the seventh where he had, I think, a 12 significant sort of power punches, in which that was the first round in which finally, after Robert Garcia was saying to him, for the first sort of 6 rounds, that you are giving away too many rounds. So there was already urgency in the Ramirez corner that he was throwing away the fight.
Oh, look, this is going to be a very interesting conversation for the simple reason that, look, for the record, you and me, we have not talked about this fight off the air. So this is basically the first time we are talking about it, except for exchanging just a couple of very short messages, which in fact led me to believe that you and me are going to have a different opinion on this fight. But listening to you now, in fact, I see that we saw pretty much the same things. First of all, when we talk about scoring the fight, yeah, sure, no one should have expected to Postol to win on the scorecards as long as Ramirez shows up as a live body, unless he shows up and looks like a corpse. He was supposed to get the decision. Now, me personally, and I rewatched the fight earlier, I scored it 7-5 for Postol, pretty much the same way I had it when I was watching it live. Now, but speaking about this never-ending discussion about boxers versus the so-called runners, I don't think at all that this was a good example of that clash of styles, because look, I really have. To me personally, it's very easy to make a distinction before a fighter who's very negative, fighting negatively, and what Postol is doing. And keep in mind that, first of all, my favorite type of fighters are the pressure fighters, the inside fighters, the short fighters, things like that. And I was never a fan of Postol. And to be honest with you, I mean, I knew that Postol, and I told some guys asking me for my prediction for the fight. I told them that I had no time to do my film study on the fight, but I was guessing that Ramirez is going to win a comfortable 8-4 decision, or even stop him in the later rounds. I was not expecting Postol to show up and look so good in the fight. Look, so it brings me back to my to my argument that Postol was not fighting defensively. Of course, especially from the mid-round zone, he had some, every round there would be 1, 2, or 3 occasions in every round where he would, run for a few seconds, after getting off his punches, he would immediately run away. But let's just not pretend as if, in Max Kellerman's words, that was the story of the fight, because most of the times, I'd say 95%, 90% of the fight, of the exchanges that occurred in that fight, what he was doing was he was he was bouncing on his feet and just staying just slightly out of Ramirez's range, and
Yes.
using a lot of lateral movement and in and out movement to keep him off balance, because he knew that Ramirez has a great power, gets a great leverage on his punches when he's able to set his feet to punch. So that was the obvious tactic that Postol used. And just like you said about his jab, it's not like he was touching him like, let's say, what Loma is doing, throwing a lot of throwaway punches to set up the more meaningful punches. Not at all. And I do think that on the contrary, he showed up a very good power on those punches. He every Almost every, if not every round, there were occasions where he would snap Ramirez's head back with numerous jabs and even the straight hands. And
Yes.
watching his ones and twos landing on Ramirez, it brought me back to one of your older videos on your channel, mentioning Kell Brook's right hand, silky right hand, and Gvozdyk, and I immediately remember that what you were saying about Gvozdyk's and Brook's right hand, uh, because they're shooting them pretty nice, not cocking them back, just and plus another reason for Postol, for him landing such a good jabs on Ramirez, is that he was timing him so well, and that's also how he was snapping his head back a lot of times. And just the last point about Ramirez, and you already said it yourself earlier. Look, how do I put it together? Yeah, exactly. It's not that Postol was running away, because, like I told you, most of the times he was staying just slightly out of his range and moving laterally. Uh, but Ramirez, I do think it's Ramirez's fault that he was not making an effort to cut the distance, but instead of that, what he was doing is he was just lazily plodding towards Postol, and plus he was very very aware of his punches. If if Postol's jabs and right hands were so soft, he would be able to take it in order to close the distance and dish out his own punches. And so, yeah, I do think he was very lazy. And uh, one last point, very last point, is that I could see this fight going from in the range from 8-4 for Postol, up to maybe 7-5 for Ramirez, but it's really me, you know, to me it's not very realistic. I'd uh, I'd say from 8-4 for Postol, to 7-5 to Ramirez, but I do think that 7-5 for Postol would be the most realistic scorecard, and it was not very difficult for me to score it. Yeah, of course, a draw, I can see it, but I still do think that the most perfect scorecard would be 7-5 for Postol. And another thing that I forgot to mention, sorry, is yeah, when we talk about the negative fighters, I always make a clear distinction between what Postol was doing, and meaning that one very important thing that I almost forgot to mention was that he was very active every round. So yeah, he
Yes.
was moving, but he was just out of range for most of the times. He would run here and there, but it was very rarely compared to the amount of times he was just staying out of range. And so his volume, the style he was fighting that fight, Uh, I mean, I'm not comparing his skills to Ali's, but the style is he was very active, like young Cassius Clay. Yeah, he was popping punches from the outside, but he was throwing them nonstop. To me, there's a clear distinction between what Cassius Clay or Postol used to do to the late career of Floyd Mayweather, or even an even better example, Erislandy Lara. Him watching Lara to me was very painful because he would really run away to the other side of the ring, and his punching output was extremely limited. So instead of talking about running, I'd more characterize my problem with those fighters as being very negative, not showing the will to do some damage, and just really running away, and not trying to throw punches. So that's my view.
You know, the ring is an enclosed space, so it's not like Viktor Postol can flee just completely out of range. So the onus is on Jose Ramirez to adequately cut off the ring, and that is one of the most fundamental lessons that an amateur boxer is taught. Now, first of all, you're taught how to stand. Your stance, getting balance, both for throwing punches as well as your fortification in terms of punch resistance. If somebody's going to land a shot on you, then your feet are obviously going to have to be firmly set so you can absorb the punches in your legs to repel the magnitude of the blow. So your stance is the first thing they'll teach you. Secondly, it's your jab, which is your which becomes muscle memory. Your jab for a multitude of reasons. And after that, what your coaches teach you is generally the third lesson is to cut off the ring. Now, Jose Ramirez didn't do a very good job at all of cutting off the ring. Now, and it comes down to effective, aggression. Viktor Postol, as we, reinforced numerous times, only 12 knockouts. Now, if his punch power was absolutely non-existent, and we know that Ramirez has a very good chin, then why didn't Ramirez just continue to try and walk him down, walk through the punches, try and trap him up against the ropes, and then just wield away, just a relentless two-fisted attack? But he never did that at any point because Viktor Postol was landing clean and reasonably hard punches that, as you mentioned, was snapping his head back. It was putting him in check. It was definitely having some impact on Ramirez, certainly for the first 6 rounds as well, mixing up his game, forcing him to reset, at times very cumbersome feet. He didn't do a good job. But if we go back a little bit, Ramirez has fought taller fighters. So he had ideal preparation of opponents in facing Viktor Postol. He fought Amir Ahmed Aman, very tall fighter as well, boxes from the outside. And he fought Mairis Hooker in that unification fight. Hooker is, I don't know, he's got to be 6 feet. And what Ramirez did well in that fight, which he did not do in this fight, was as soon as he threw a jab, and generally an up jab in that fight, he angled his attacks straight away up against a flat-footed fighter who doesn't have the dexterity to rotate either left or right 90 degrees to try and negate a fighter coming in at an angled approach. So Ramirez was able to get off with his punches, certainly to the body as well. And Mairis Hooker had a 7-inch reach advantage in the fight as well. So whenever the fight was fought at a longer distance, a longer range, what Hooker intermittently was able to maintain during the fight, he was winning the exchanges. But whenever the fight was closer, now, when you've got much longer arms, obviously you can reach the target straight away, but you're not able to rotate. You're not able to get any traction on your punches. So you're only pushing your opponent back. Whereas Ramirez at that sort of range with his shorter arms was able to generate power, and eventually it was a beautiful left hook and then two straight punches through the middle that hurt Maurice Hooker on the ropes, eventually leading to a very, very quick referee sort of intervention and stopping the fight. I thought it was a little bit premature, but Maurice Hooker, he didn't complain too much post-fight, so I'm not going to criticize the referee heavily, but that was an exciting fight, and I think Maurice Hooker made the errors that he was thinking that he could compete with Ramirez both at long range, where he should have kept the fight. Otherwise, what's the point of having all of your advantages in height and reach? But he thought he could actually fight and trade with Ramirez at short range, and he did at times because he was counter punching quite well, catching Ramirez as well with some good shots. So he definitely did have ability, but Ramirez's hand speed was a lot better, and he's a better combination puncher at that range. So, and he's definitely got a bit of pop in his punches as well. And Hooker really didn't have the punch resistance to sustain that attack. So Ramirez, in transitioning from that fight to this fight, much different fighter, because Hooker, as we mentioned, is a lot more flat-footed. Postol up on his toes, a much better balanced fighter as well. But Ramirez was also stepping on Hooker's toes, and that's what led to the knockdown very early on in the fight as well. That seemed a little bit ludicrous, but I noticed he was doing that all throughout the fight, stepping on his foot, so he could get away with the body punches as well. So that's the little tricks that these fighters do to try and restrict their movement. But in this fight, official, Andre Ward made the point that that Viktor Postol would be jabbing 1-2s and then clinching straight away. Now I didn't see any clinching or any smothering that excessively at all. Maybe there was a few later on in the fight, but for the first half of the fight, there was absolutely, the referee didn't have to stop them at all. So Ramirez's aggression didn't force Viktor Postol to change his tactics, didn't restrict or curtail his punch activity, didn't force Viktor Postol to clinch or smother Ramirez, didn't force Viktor Postol to move even more excessively on the back foot. His back didn't even hardly touch the ropes at all. The fight was very much, at the sort of central real estate around a large sort of circumference around the middle of the ring, what Postol was using very well. So, and from what I could gauge as well, official, they both stunned as opposed to significantly hurt each other. I'd say twice. The first time Ramirez did it was in the 7th round. Postol definitely hurt him with a raking, nice straight right hand in the 10th. And he landed a two-piece combination, finishing off with a beautiful short uppercut as well at short range. Now, both of them definitely stunned Ramirez temporarily, but nothing significant. Both of them are relatively poker-faced as well. So the aggression overall, official, I think it was a pretty balanced. So that's not really the main component to be adjudicating the fight, because there was no knockouts, no knockdowns, no sustained dominance from one side, no clear 10-8. My point, it was both of them winning significant rounds here and there, pretty split. Postol taking most of the early rounds, Ramirez coming back in the middle, and Postol came on later on in the fight. He definitely won the 12th. He was actually counter punching really well, catching Ramirez with the left hook as well in the 12th. So pretty pretty balanced, I'd say. So it really comes down to the components, I'd say, of clean punches. But you can't rely on CompuBox because that system, that system is skewed, it's biased. I think it's definitely a tool for the network broadcaster. It's generally their employees who populate these scoring sort of apparatus, and it's human decisions, and humans are obviously prone to error as well. But when they're employees who are doing it at the behest of the of the broadcaster, then can we really rely on CompuBox? I pay no attention to that whatsoever. I tend to do my own scoring subsequent to the fights, as I've always done. And clean punches, I think they had Ramirez up slightly on the clean punches. They had it. They did acknowledge that Postol had the advantage up after the 6th round, and then suddenly it swung around, and they were mentioning that Ramirez had like a 10 or a 15-point advantage in power punches, which, okay, Postol is utilizing more his jab. That's his fundamental weapon. But it wasn't that. His jab is obviously precipitating the attacks that are forthcoming with his right hand as well. It adds as a decoy punch. It establishes range and distance. It's a head snapping back punch as well. So it's at times he utilizes it as a power punch as well. So it's a very effective weapon. But a jab will always be correlated as a jab, and that's one of the other problems of CompuBox as well. They don't tend to differentiate between power punches. If I land to the body and it's a decoy punch, a lot of the times what Roman Gonzalez was doing on Cal and then coming back with harder punches, they'll still score it as a power punch, even though the magnitude of that punch could even be less than a throwaway jab. So CompuBox is just too one-dimensional, and I don't think it objectively gives a true reflection of the fight.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, corruption at this point it's really retarded to even take CompuBox seriously for any boxing fan who's been watching boxing for quite some time. And same way with the commentary. It's been years since I stopped listening to the commentary, and like many people are saying, it would be amazing if there was an option of having an option somehow to just listen to the sounds in the arena, in the ring, listening, being able to hear the punches, but not the commentary team. But it's never going to be possible. But let me just say something real quickly, just before I go back to this fight, because you mentioned something interesting that I wanted to point out, but I forgot. Anyways, to everybody in the chat room, first of all, sorry we are not really able to interact with you because at least me, I'm really making an effort to really listen to what corruption is saying. And so I cannot interact, but we're very grateful for all of you being here with us. First episode, 20 plus viewers, and thanks to Mark from Unrivaled Boxing Tokyo News, and Johnny Boy's Boxing Palace, and all of you guys for bringing the people here. Big thank you. But yeah, let me come back to the fight. So I really wanted to point out that Postol was, first of all, his jab, he was throwing a lot of punches, a lot of jabs to the body, and they were very stiff and stopping Ramirez while he was coming in. And I think it was a very extremely effective punch for him. And okay, in the mid rounds, let's say he started getting tired, and that's why Ramirez swapped those rounds. But also in those rounds, sorry, I saw him. I saw that he was not throwing that punch, that jab to the body. So it's also maybe another reason why, how do you say, uh, why he was not as effective in those mid rounds as he was in the beginning. And another point that I wanted to make
Yeah, that's a
is,
great point. Ramirez was, it was a phased process. He was just targeting that body whenever he had an opportunity, because Postol's movements were still very active early on. So it was only single couple of punches to the body, but yeah, they reaped dividends in the sort of mid part of the fight when Ramirez started getting into the fight. So yeah, you're absolutely right. The body attack slowed him down.
oh yeah, definitely. Thank you. So yeah, but speaking of Postol's movement, the way he was bouncing on his feet all the time and using a lot of lateral movement, and as you surely saw it in the fight, a lot of times just after throwing his two three-piece combos in the pocket, he was pivoting out on his front foot and using the head movement in the process. So the way he was pivoting out, a lot of times he was getting off balance. So even when not Postol, sorry, Ramirez was lunging in with hooks while Postol was moving away from him after throwing his combos. Uh, Many times Postol was blocking those punches, but just because Postol did not have a firm connection with the canvas, his feet did not have he was not standing firmly on the canvas. So the way he was reacting and getting off balance, it looked like those were some scoring or very hard punches, but he was still blocking them. But I saw no real effect because, like I said, he was blocking them, and those were pushing him off balance while he was disengaging and using the lateral movement. So I can see why to many people it looked like Ramirez was doing something good in those how do you say it, in those moments. But to me, it was what I was seeing was just the case of Postol, being off balance. So when he was blocking those hooks, he was still in the air without having a firm contact with the ground, with canvas. So that's why it looked like Ramirez was landing some serious punches, although they were missing, they were getting blocked. And by the way, just for the record, because I didn't have an occasion to ask you, uh, what was finally your scorecard for the fight?
When I scored the fight live, I had it 5-6. So 5 to Postol, sorry, 5 to Ramirez, 6 to Postol, and 1 even. Watching it live at like some ridiculous 5 o'clock in the morning. But going back and watching the fight, maybe much closer. The one even fight, the one even round 4, I think it was. I had that even initially. You could perhaps, edge it to Viktor Postol. So it could be a little bit like you're on 7-5, but I'll keep with the 5-6-1 even. I think that's a to me, that from my perspective, I think that's a fairly accurate reflective scorecard. I think Viktor Postol, yeah, I think he marginally edged out the fight from what I can see. But Ramirez a little bit more diverse in his punch selection. Postol not enough body work, and that's always been his problem. Not enough the ability in fighting on the inside as well at times when he is perhaps a little bit trapped up against the ropes. But you know, when Postol fought Terence Crawford, Bud Crawford did his best impersonation of the great middle distance runner Haile Gebrselassie. Because if Bud Crawford was running either the London or the New York Marathon, I think he probably would have beaten Haile Gebrselassie. The amount of distance he covered in the ring in what was one of the most derisory unification bouts, and that was largely due to Bud's strategy. I don't know, official. It was his first time on pay-per-view. Kind of a nervous individual. Doesn't really like to be in front of the camera. Kind of very, very stubborn as well. Not saying he's a horrible guy, but he just seems very uncomfortable. Maybe didn't realize, grasped what it took to be an entertaining fighter. It didn't.
Sorry, who that? You're talking about Crawford?
Yeah, and but in one respect, it was effective because he forced the taller, sometimes sneaky sort of boxer counter puncher. He forced him onto the front foot in trying to hunt and seek Terence Crawford. Not what Viktor Postol likes to do. So he took him out of his comfort zone, made the fight very ugly. Crawford switching stances and just sort of buzzing around the ring. It was so visually and from a visceral sense, it was a horrible fight. But Bud, in retrospect, maybe just completely flipped the script on Viktor Postol and said, "Look, I know the way you box, but now you're going to have to try and chase me. I'm going to use perpetual motion, and I'm going to pick you off with my, switching stances, so using my lead hand conventionally as my power punch and just timing you with sort of heavy punches from the outside." And Postol, I don't know, he couldn't really deal with it. He couldn't really get Bud at that range in which he was comfortable, to exchange. And so Postol, definitely has the deficiencies, but Ramirez didn't exploit it in that sense. It was very underwhelming. When Postol fought Josh Taylor, the other unification, Viktor was a lot more aggressive in that fight, official, than in this fight. I felt he was not moving as much, but at times he was willing to stand and trade with even Josh Taylor, who is a very good inside fighter. Josh doesn't have a good jab at all, so he can be picked off as well. And Postol, I think, put up a very good performance against Josh Taylor. So he's definitely shared the ring, and he's not replicated the same style against all these very touted marquee championship fighters. But that was a unification. Josh Taylor, obviously champion now, unification winner of the World Boxing Super Series, and now Ramirez as well, unified champion. So he brings it. The age is not a debilitating factor. 37 years old. Maybe his market value is not as high. Hence why the decisions don't go in his favor. But to try and jettison it, try and use the false perception of his boxing acumen as some sort of a scapegoat that it's a non-effective style. I think it's just plain wrong. It's merely the fact that, yeah, he is a veteran. Jose Ramirez has the upside. He is a financially, he's a beneficial fighter for Top Rank. Plus, they can sell the undisputed championship with Josh Taylor, two undefeated youngsters going into that fight. So it's all the predictable signs to build up a massive pay-per-view for that fight, Plus, Viktor Postol has already fought Josh Taylor, so is a rematch an undisputed between them? Is it gonna be any less in terms of viewing pleasure than what Ramirez and Josh Taylor will be? So there are geopolitical, economic factors that I think are definitely calibrated the scoring on this fight.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, who in his right mind would think that someone like Postol, who first of all is not known for being a super entertaining and aggressive fighter, uh, furthermore a fighter from Ukraine and without no big following, that he would be given the edge by the judges. It's a complete nonsense. And like you said, on one hand, right now you have Ramirez who has a big following and is selling a lot of tickets constantly for any of his fights. The American, the Mexican crowd behind him versus a fresh new signing for a top rank whose potential is very high, and he already proved it in his previous fights. Uh, Plus, unlike Postol, he's an English-speaking guy. He's much younger than him, so they have top rank clearly have much more. How do you say it? Upside. Scheduling that fight between them than what would be a rematch between Taylor and Postol.
But in a way, the hypocrisy with the so-called purists who like the Mexican style of boxing, who were criticizing or even condemning Viktor Postol in this fight, these are the same people that had Matvey Korobov beating Jamal Charlo and Tyson Fury beating, Vladimir Klitschko. Now, did they do anything so significantly different to what Viktor Postol was doing? Tyson Fury landed less 60 odd punches. He wasn't.
Sorry, really sorry for cutting you off, but yeah, great point. So it brings me back to what I already said. You want to know the difference between those fights, between what Postol have just done against Ramirez and what Tyson was doing against Klitschko or Korobov versus Charlo. Well, Postol was being much more active and really throwing punches nonstop.
Yeah, absolutely. No, Matvey Korobov, now that is a guy who clearly, unfortunately, has not transitioned from amateur to professional ranks that well. Really doesn't throw a punch with the knuckle part of his glove unless it's that straight left hand. But Jamal Charlo just doesn't know how to deal with boxers who fight from the outside. It's been two southpaws, both who have fought differently, that have just bamboozled him. Austin Trout did it, but instead of doing it in the conventional way, in which a southpaw does by pivoting off against the orthodox fighter, getting that lead foot advantage and pivoting off to the right, he was actually moving the other way and landing, long diagonal left crosses and Jamal Charlo, who just really has to set his feet. He wants that fight a little bit because he's a cruel, sort of crude bludgeoner, very aggressive. Yeah, he does want to take your head off, but if you can get that fight on the outside, and what Korobov was doing was beautiful, left hands with the knuckles, sometimes to the body as a decoy, and then landing that check right hook and then pivoting off with the lead foot on the outside. Charlo would just recklessly come in, stands too wide, and then the punches just go whizzing past. So that was bamboozling Jamal Charlo quite easily, but Korobov was pretty much replicating that the entire fight. There was nothing that ultra aggressive he was doing. It was just pretty homogeneous throughout. Eventually, Jamal Charlo began to, shorten up his stride, get a little bit lower, and then put it on him later on in the bout. But many felt that Korobov had won that fight, but instead, I didn't hear that much criticism to Korobov that it was too amateurish and all the rest of that nonsense. It was more like, well, Jamal Charlo has been exposed against a guy who was supposed to be fighting against somebody else, had to cut 4 pounds. So he had insufficient preparation time against Jamal and was able to deal with him reasonably well. Maybe to a sort of decision, but he was never going to get that, not Korobov. So
surely not. And beside that, beside fighting him the way you just described from the outside, I'm currently I'm still analyzing and doing my film study on Charlo versus Deryanchenko. So I don't know if maybe it would be better because I haven't finished yet, and so maybe we should talk about or I don't know, any way you like it, or maybe we should talk other time about that fight. But
yeah,
another thing that
we'll definitely cover that fight in more detail when we do the sort of preview for it. Yeah, but it was just it was more the case on Korobov and comparing him directly to Viktor Postol and seeing if there's much differentiation between them and whether one decision is more justifiable over the other. So it's just that lack of consistency, in the appraisal of all these so-called experts who just sort of they just fluctuate like a pendulum when it suits them. It's more down to subjective, their proclivity there and then at a specific fight and the fighter. But a lot of it is they're biased. It's nationalistic biased, and it's because we're all fans at the end of the day, so we all have those tendencies. But some of us, try and stay a little bit more objective, because apart from having money on the fight, which really is, our only so-called stake on the fight, but it doesn't determine. We don't really have any vested interest. It's not like Viktor Postol is paying the rent on my property or anything. So if he wins or loses, yeah, I don't really give a flying fuck,
Absolutely, corruption. Yeah, just like you said, I mean, for sure, you and me, we both have our favorite fighters. But if you go and take a look at our respective channels, you'll see that the idea behind both of your and my channel are that we are just trying to pick the right winner to be right in our predictions, putting aside our favoritism for certain fighters, because many times you can admire and like a fighter as much as you like, but you're going to be realistic and say, yeah, but I think he's losing this fight. And okay, speaking about the fanboys, yeah, you can always make the case, and I 100% agree with it, and that is that you can pick two different fights with similar stylistic matchup and have a, let's say, a pure boxer against a pressure fighter, and in one fight a pressure fighter would clearly be the one who's deserving the victory, while in the same matchup in the other fight it may be the other way around. So it's up to how good you're performing, you're performing in your style. But yeah, on the other hand, I saw many boxing fans, their opinion fluctuating and not really being consistent. And so, like you said, when you ask them to explain their opinion, they're not able to do it because you're clearly showing them what they were saying in one example, and then comparing it to the exact same example from a different fight. They were saying the other thing. But that's why, like I told you earlier before the show, I mean, I do think it sucks that judges are able to have such a freedom to quote unquote justify their scorecards. I do think that, at least that's the way I'm doing it, that the most important factor should always be the number of punches landed, and if it's similar, then the power punches. Everything else than that is pretty much style and no substance.
Yeah, if when you're gauging effective aggression, and I look at that Katie Taylor and the Delphine Piassoon fight as the perfect example. That was Katie Taylor sort of embodying a style over substance fight. But her aggression, if she had maintained her strategy of boxing from the outside and just picking off Piassoon, who's obviously not as adept with skill and sort of proficiency, but somebody who relies on heart and work rate and an aggressive nature, and using a numerical sort of advantages in height. If Katie had maintained her strategy, then it would have been easier fight. But her aggression was not because it didn't her work rate progressively. It didn't deplete her, didn't force her to clinch. So the aggression is not effective. Then it comes down to clean punching and ring generalship. And Delphine Piassoon, ring general, because she fully into a dogfight to renege on her original strategy, something that her coach was absolutely furious about, for her just, deviating and trying to trade it with Delphine, at the rate in which Delphine was happier to exchange and trade. So Delphine Piassoon was the ring general. It's all about who is fighting their fight and forcing the other person to fight. Fighter A's fight, and Delphine Piassoon forced Katie Taylor into that fight and was landing more punches, clean punches. But unfortunately, people were thinking that they weren't clean punches, but they definitely were clean punches, because Katie Taylor's work rate had depleted, and Delphine Piassoon was getting the last punch off the exchanges. So yeah, then the default criteria that have the greater loading factor are clean punches, because clean punches is a derivative of effective aggression. It has to be, otherwise. But if if aggression is not effective, then you've got to look at the other components, and that's the way the criteria works. So if there are no clear knockdowns, knockouts, no significant, then you've got to look at clean punches. Once again, official, then that becomes a little bit ambiguous as well. People, COMPUBOX will really microanalyzed, the punches to see that they landed, not actually blocked, hitting the shoulders, etc. But for me, there was clear daylight in the fight. I think it was pretty easy to sort of differentiate between a clean landed punch and a slipped or a blocked punch. So it wasn't for me a difficult fight to score. But I think we pretty much covered that one in sufficient detail. I think it's still going to be polarizing, but this dichotomy in the scoring between judges, who I think are still stuck between the perception of what they're scoring is going to continue, and it's only going to get worse and worse as the rules and regulations of sport continue. If we're getting state athletic commissions that are now assessing fighters during a fight, the way Deontay Wilder was, then health and safety is becoming a larger component in fights. So it's not really a war of attrition anymore, because the regulators are so afraid of the obvious damage that a fighter sustains, and then the asymmetrical effects of the medical costs that the state and the insurance companies and the medical facilities, their liability as well. So there's just so many implications on boxing now. It's definitely impacting the way referees are now stopping fights prematurely as well. We're seeing, that happening so often as well. So for me, it's a very, very different sport now.
Absolutely, man. And speaking of Katie Taylor and that card, I'm just gonna say a few words about the main event of that card, and that is Dillian Whyte versus Povetkin. Oh, and you like it. You like the topic. So yeah, I mean, look, watching it live, I was watching it on my phone, streaming it on my phone, and I was unfortunate enough to I don't even ignore I ignore for what reason. I was listening to the commentary team of Sky Sport, which was terrible, and being that I was watching it on my phone, I was not really able to see what was really happening. And watching it live, I believed that they were accurate on calling the fight, because I thought Dillian Whyte was blocking most of Povetkin's punches, and yeah, while he did an excellent job of doing it, uh, I also saw many missed opportunities to call on Povetkin's punches, because rewatching it on my screen, on a big screen, I actually thought that Povetkin, out of the first 3 rounds, he clearly, he clearly won the first round. He landed more punches in the second one, and the third one was very close. So yeah, but watching it live, I was pretty much scared, as my let's say reputation was on the line because of the results I was predicting to happen.
Yeah,
And it was
did.
okay.
You got that
Yeah,
one
so
right. I know you was predicting Povetkin, and I've already covered that fight in sufficient detail. But what I'll just say in conclusion of that fight, for Alexander Povetkin to have the mental clarity, the poise, the guile, and the ability to calibrate an attack after sustaining 2 knockdowns, and to execute it with precision, the hardest and the most beautiful punch in all of boxing, that counter uppercut straight through the middle, 2 orthodox fighters, for him to do that with that sort of precision, you really, and not a lot of desires, disguise, feinted to the body using the decoys of the body punches in the early on. So Dillian was, you know, definitely slowed down his punch reflexes. So his ability to react to that sort of feint to the body, dip, shift. Dillian thinking he's going to come left hook to the body, but instead come up straight through the middle. That that's why Alexander Povetkin is a former, world Olympic champion, kickboxing world champion, former, WBA, whatever it was, regular world champion. He's a tremendously gifted fighter, and somebody who has, matured, like a good single malt Scotch. He's, that, I don't see any depletion in his ability whatsoever. That's a testament to to his mental fortitude. That was a just a breathtaking climax to the fight, and well deserved and fully justifiable.
Oh, absolutely. When I was watching the fight live and listening to Mark's live stream, when people on his stream went crazy, I was thinking, yeah, that's it. And in the fourth round, I was in the chat saying, what was I saying? Oh, too bad. You know, I'm sorry. I'm feeling sorry for Povetkin because he's my favorite heavyweight, and it looks like he is going to be taken out very soon. But man, he showed up to be a cold-blooded veteran. Amazing what he did. The only thing that I completely was wrong about was
Yeah,
the way he was going to fight. Because look, I knew while the most people were saying that he is going to try to take him out early, and at the end of the day, he kind of did that, but it wasn't showing up really in the way he was fighting. I knew that Povetkin would take the early rounds off, take some time to warm up, but what I was completely wrong in my prediction was that I was expecting him to use more of his foot movement. So I don't know if it's his age showing up, or was it him just doing exactly what he later did, like, or was it him consciously, choosing to stay within Dillian's white range, because I was kind of expecting him to do the similar thing that he was doing against Michael Hunter, going in and out and controlling the range much more. And I even predicted him to win the long range exchanges because of that footwork, but it was not showing up, and Dillian White was landing a lot of stiff jabs on him.
yeah. I'm gonna get kind of metaphysical in just finishing off this fight. Two sayings, you know, a wounded animal is the most dangerous animal, and Dillian White found that out. And secondly, stress and adversity, what Povetkin was facing, are the fertilizers for creativity. And my God, did he show some creativity with that finishing combo? That was breathtaking. So yeah, ridiculous that they have to do it again when you've got such a definitive winner. No ambiguities whatsoever. There was no controversy in the fight, but Vietkin sparked him out. Should be getting a world title fight, but this is the realms of boxing now. Official, we're getting mandatory challenges for some alphabet soup in remedial title, whatever it was, the WBC Pizza Hut title. I don't know, whatever bullshit it was. We're getting mandatory stipulations, and soon we're going to get mandatories for the WBC Intercontinental and the rest of these nonsensical belts that are just being diluting boxing. What is it? 78 belts in 17 weight categories. The so-called consolidation that the WBA was doing, that completely went out of the window. They just immediately recycle a belt whenever there was a consolidation, like Golovkin and Danny Jacobs, WBA regular, WBA super, try and do the right thing and get rid of one belt, but immediately they recycle it and they ship it over to Japan with Hasim and Dam and Murata fighting for the regular belt. So it's there's no credibility in the sanctioning bodies either. So, and now with the WBC franchise belt, the WBC have realized that given the demarcation with these promotional companies and the lack of ability for them to do business cross border, cross street, why don't we just create a new belt and ship it out to the other side of the street? So Canelo Alvarez will elevate him to the WBC Super, and he's mandatory Jamal Charlo. He's a PBC fighter, so they're not going to fight. So we'll give him we'll FedEx him the WBC belt as well. So they do that with Devin Haney and Vasily Lomachenko as well, top rank on one side, and we give it to Devin Haney, who's obviously fighting with Eddie Hearn on the DAZN platform as well. So, financially shrewd in terms of, trying to get a belt on either side so they can obviously gain from sanctioning fees, etc. So, so the sanctioning bodies are clearly accentuating to all of the boxing fans that they're not here. They're not here for our vested interests at all. They're here for their own individual financial gain. That was, ceteris paribus. That was abundantly clear, decades ago. And it's just becoming more and more problematic. They don't like, the WBA and the WBO, they don't like doing business together. They don't like undisputed titles as well. They prefer, titles to be with individual fighters. It's just not in their vested interest unless it is a marquee fighter who is getting maximum revenues from both pay-per-view, gate receipts ever, in which they can levy their sanctioning fees, because it's obviously correlated on the purse of the fight, on the champion as well. So I don't know, in a way it's bittersweet. It's frustrating. The women are doing great things. I think they've got 3 undisputed fighters, undisputed champions. So, but it's not the same. It's not the same sport. It's not the same pool and volume of fighters as well. The probability and the propensity to become unified and undisputed is significantly greater for women's boxing than it is for men's boxing. Plus, they're not fighting 3-minute rounds over 12 rounds as well. So it's not a great comparison, but it shows that it is possible. You can have it. It's not a non-existent sort of concept that we just berate ourselves week after week in frustration, saying why isn't the undisputed heavyweight championship happening? Why isn't the 140 undisputed happening? But that fight is obviously a lot easier to make, given that Josh Taylor is now on ESPN. So it kind of simplifies the process. So there's no reason why it cannot happen. But a lot of the other unifications and undisputed fights, remain a little bit of a distant sort of, hope for us boxing fans.
Yes, you know what? Speaking of women's boxing, I haven't been following it, but I'm just warming up to this idea of, starting to follow their fights. And yeah, they're doing the right thing. So what it tells me is that the problem with boxing is too much money involved especially in certain weight classes. So yeah, I mean, to add to what you were just saying, we don't even have to go to the women's boxing to find the competitive fights, but we can go to the lower weight classes. So it's much different. So and being that they don't have promoters as invested in them as
Yeah,
uh, as they are in the bigger weight classes, they're kind of, and you said it yourself a year or two ago on your own video that being that the situation in those lower weight classes is such, they have to make the best possible fights available in order to
yeah.
eat. So yeah, but speaking of the sanctioning bodies, I mean, it's really terrible. As if four belts for different belts were not already enough. So beside that, every of those four belts can have two or three champions, which which can theoretically give you five champions per division. So
Yeah.
how do you explain it to a casual fan who wants to get into boxing? Terrible.
And this is the point, official. We're talking about why now boxing is no longer. It was once, the heavyweight championship was, once correctly deemed as the greatest prize in all of. Now we're seeing boxing has become a niche sport in the United, and it's directly correlated to what is happening. How can you attract new fans when new participant or new fan to boxing cannot even identify a singular world champion? We have four world champions. Do you have that in the National Football League or the NBA? No, you have one champion, the world champion, whatever, if it's domestically in the States. But boxing, no, we have four so-called recognized major sanctioning bodies, and now the IBO obviously wants the pizza to be sliced into five pieces now. And I wouldn't mind the IBO coming in, but it would have to be a trade-off. It wouldn't have to be an addendum to the current structure. So having five, it should be at the expense. So one of the other four, if not all of them or two of them, are rented, so-called sanctioning revoked, but there isn't a major regulator in the sport to do that. It's not like the UFC. So that's not going to happen, because what we have here is an oligarchy structure, or if not, an oligarchy. We've got four players who like in sort of economics, can manipulate the price of the commodity. When competition to that, they will work together to lower the price, to force the new interest to go up.
Sorry for cutting you off,
They will
but
just
I do think. Sorry for cutting you off, but I think that you're breaking up. I'm not sure if it's due to my own connection or if you're breaking up.
Is that better now?
Yeah, yes, it is. Sorry for cutting you off. Please go on.
No. As I was mentioning, it's just an oligarchy structure. So if you don't have a main regulator, if there's no oversight of these sanctioning bodies, then we're not going to get any fundamental changes to the sport.
Definitely, man. You know what? Speaking of all these problems that boxing is facing today, oh, it's amazing that a boxing fan would be surprised. A boxing fan from the older days would be surprised at me saying that we should probably have at this point we should probably have somebody like Don King back. Uh, I mean, I don't want to sound cruel and crude to the boxers, because what he was doing back in the day was really bad, and but at the same time, a part of the problem was that also those fighters were, they were also losing money also due to their own stupidity. But if I watched boxing as a simple boxing fan, I do think that we the boxing fans, should stop caring as much about what our favorite fighters are getting, how much money they're getting, and even probably boycott them until they start making the right fights that we want to see. So what I'm saying is, let's just stop justifying our favorite fighters. At this point, I had it enough with boxing in that sense. So I just want them to fight the best possible opposition that is available to them, and I'd rather, at this point, I'd rather have another Down King robbing them, but giving me as a fan the fights that I'm looking for, because we are not getting them enough, not at all.
Yeah, and Bob Arum, well, he pretty much circumvented, the power and influence and market sort of share of Don King, and he did it in the way of using his Harvard Law School um, sort of academia and training, and working on legislation, specifically the Muhammad Ali, the Reform Act, and creating that demarcation between promoters and sort of managers, and that effectively led to the demise of Don King and severely reduced his power as well. So Bob Arum, he did that to his own, to his sort of to his old school, the protagonist and the antagonist, them two.
Yeah, and I, I haven't really gave a deeper thought about it yet, but uh, I'm thinking of, if those all these major promoters are to fail, maybe the boxing, at least the competition would be better. Maybe I'm totally wrong about it, because it has its own advantages, and but basically, I would prefer to watch a competitive fight. I don't know how to put it together,
Yeah, no,
but you get
I
me.
hear you. Yeah, absolutely. Now, um, let's talk about it. Let's talk about any other significant fights that you want to perhaps touch upon. What have we got in the last week? Nothing spectacular. Daniel Dubois, well, he pretty much decimated Schneiders from the Netherlands. That boy, he didn't do us, Duck and myself, justice. I think we should exile him to Belgium. He shouldn't be welcome back over there. The cruiserweight moving up to heavyweight. So, but Dubois dispatched him. Nice body work, but is that really sufficient preparation for a Joyce? I don't know. It's Joyce is going to bring a whole different lot of attacking Arsenal. So that'll be an interesting fight. We'll cover that. But nothing to cover off the Dubois fight. It was Landy Lara, the American Dream. Unfortunately, we're not our dreams are not aligned because, I don't know who the hell he's fighting now in his is it even his veteran years, or is it his retirement years, or his pension years? Who knows? But I don't know whether he's gonna eke his way back up to title contention at 154. No, because Israel, Madrimov, I wanted to talk about that fight briefly, as I didn't really do a post-fight video because of a lot of kind of indifferent and negative fallout of the fight he had against Thomas Walker. I think that was a couple of weeks ago on the Zone. An absolutely fantastic fight. Definitely a major contender for fight of the year thus far. A fight that definitely exceeded expectations. Walker was one of these cats, official, almost like a modern day Chase of the murderer's row. Spent 10 years Dixon Correctional Facility over in Louisiana. So he emerged in his late 30s, but I think he won like 60 odd fights in prison, learned his craft. And my God, a very competent boxer. Up against, Israel Madrimov from, Tashkent, Uzbekistan, a place, I believe it or not, official, I've actually been to a few times, Tashkent, Uzbekistan, on a changeover flight. Uzbekistan, different from Ukraine and Russia, because they tend to, they're more influenced by Mexican boxing as opposed to Ukraine, etc., and definitely Russia. All three of them very different styles of boxing. Even Azerbaijan, very, very different from Uzbekistan. Uzbeks, they're aggressive fighters who definitely like to stand and trade, and that's what even the amateur school of boxing advocates in their fighters. Certainly since when the 10-point must system was introduced into amateur boxing as well. So that's why we're seeing them transitioning after gaining a lot of success in amateur tournaments, and Madrimov, a lot of speculation, not definitive regarding his amateur credentials, but around 335 victories. But he didn't. It's much like Dmitry Bivol with him. It's a little bit superficial because it's a lot of state and regional championships that he won, but it was never translated at the highest echelon in the amateur ranks, not at world or Olympic level. But he's a tremendous fighter. He's a fan-friendly type of fighter as well. But up against Walker, I think it was the perfect fight for him because his promoters are definitely fast-tracking him. And I think this was possibly for an eliminator, had a junior middleweight. And Madrimov, from I'm definitely, I've still got very high expectations as him as one of the best fighters from Uzbekistan. I hold Shakarim Giasov in high esteem, as I have done since following him right at the time in the amateurs covering his fights. Jalalev at super heavyweight, who's gone back into the Olympics. Southpaw heavyweight, who's a prodigious talent as well. Has already fought obviously professionally, but he's going back, to cement his legacy as one of the best amateurs to come out of Uzbekistan. Bakhtaviar Melakuziev, that super middleweight, is a ferocious fighter as well. And Akhmedaliev is already a unified champion as well at sort of bantamweight. So the emergence, not only the emergence, but the establishment and could be the next phase, the domination from these fighters is there. And now my favorite prospect in all of boxing, Hassan Boy Duzmatov, who we covered, myself and Mike and the rest of the guys from the Pound for Pound Boxing Report. Junior flyweight, we covered that tournament in detail, and you can go back to the archives of the Pound for Pound Boxing Report. Duzmatov, fighting against Argumendo, the Colombian. He was brilliant in the tournament, and now he's at 105 as well. So, he means business, and he'll get a title shot real soon as well. So, but official, with Madrimov, the dream, I think the fight was obviously shrouded in controversy with a knockdown that the referee he did differentiate it. He did mention that it was a good punch that landed. It was a leaping left hook, typical of Madrimov, the way he fights. But the sheer momentum of his propelling off the ground after connecting with the left hook, his shoulder absolutely banged into Walker as well. Now it's difficult to gauge how much damage a shoulder would have done just in isolation if the punch was not before that. So you can kind of understand both ways. Thomas Walker was definitely hurt. He was definitely out. But the referee, didn't adjudicate that as a knockdown or even a knockout as what the zone commentators were ruling. But it's ironic that the break actually gave Madrimov time. It re-energized him, because before the knockdown, his energy had depleted, and it comes down to sort of microanalyzing his style and his deficiencies and how he can remediate them and what he can do. I think he can kill a lot of birds with one stone here, is that because he likes to get a little bit low as well. And if he developed an up jab, which he just doesn't have, not only will it mix up his attack, but it adds a little bit more deception and guile when he's trying to get a little bit close, because he's a prodigious and just an outright power puncher, body and head, ferocious, and he tends to overload his punches pretty much every time. So if you're just landing power punches and somebody like Walker has that punch resistance as well, then how long are you going to be able to sustain those attacks for sort of 36 minutes? Not only that, you become one-dimensional and predictable as well. So when he's trying to get lower and trying to get in on the target, Walker would, not even on his back foot, but he would just literally stand stationary, catch Madrimov with the straight right hand when he's in orthodox. And when Madrimov switch hits, he tends to rotate at the same angle. So when you're just shifting, when you're switch hitting, when you're just shifting 90 degrees from clockwise and counterclockwise without even pivoting to change your angle. So what's happening is that your attack is still frontal. It's still a frontal attack. It's just that you're in a different stance. So Walker was able to mix up his punches, catch Madrimov with a check left when he was switching stances, but when he was going back to orthodox, he'd catch him with the straight right. Because the attack was coming at the same angle. It didn't matter that, that Madrimov was just changing the lead punching hand and varying that attack. So, but the strategy is still the same. The target is not moving. His head is not really off the line either. So Madrimov he's going to need to sort of recalibrate, your switch hitting, because in the end, it just adds to wasted movement. That coupled with 95% power punching, no jabs. The jabs will give him the opportunity to take a breather in between the power punches as well, to mix up the attacks. And he needs to land the speed and punches of his jab as well. So I really hope that his coaches have looked at that fight. I think it was a fight he absolutely needed, because you're not going to go into a fight against a Rosario or even, Jamel Charlo at 154 and thinking that you're just going to blast him out, because, Jamel Charlo is called the Iron Man for a reason. I think, he does have the ability to take some punches. So, but he can also land knockout blows of it, and whoever is the victor of the Rosario and Charlo fight, both of them can punch as well. So there's going to be that's going to be arguably a much more difficult fight than what the Walker fight was. But we don't really know, because there's not a lot of fights on sort of Walker. Maybe he's just a lot better than what our anticipation was, but I think it was a blessing in disguise, and I really hope that his team, his promoters, can really review that fight with open eyes, not with this stubbornness or some sort of stupidity, and just overlook it and think that you can just go into a world championship fight and just sort of replicate the same fighting style, because there's no rush. You've only had, God knows, he's not even had 10 fights. He's 25 years old. I don't blame him. He wants a championship fight very, very quickly. He doesn't appear to be one of those fighters in which, a defeat is going to railroad his career. I think he's mentally strong enough that if he does suffer an unexpected defeat, to him, and certainly to what his fans, if they're not, if they're not even prognosticating that, it's not even in their lexicon, then I think he can still, recover, come back, and get stronger and stronger. But saying that, I think he's got to implement a much better jab. He's got to have better defense from the outside when he's coming in, and he's got to not leap too much or just throw too many power punches as well. So yeah, I'm still very, very confident that he can win a world championship at 154 pounds. But defeat is definitely not out of the realms of possibility for all of the deficiencies that I've just sort of highlighted. So over to you, my man.
Yeah, so I missed that last fight from the other week, but I only saw what was supposed to be in the knockout, but was not ruled the knockout. But other than that, the last fight of Israel Madrimov I saw was on the just the previous one that happened on the undercard of Garcia versus Vargas. And yeah, I was seeing. I mean, it was not a surprise to me, because I've already seen him boxing that way. He was boxing that way since he turned pro, because I was not following him in the amateurs. But yeah, I saw too much flash, and I was hoping to see more substance because, like you mentioned, like you pointed out, his defense was not good enough. He was too careless and was getting countered on his way in, leaping in with punches. Now he's very exciting to me to watch, and he's extremely athletic, and his style, you know, is definitely going to be if he starts fighting the top level opposition, and he finds success with beating some of the top opponents. He can definitely become very, I don't know how to say it. Many people are going to find him very entertaining when they discover him, and I do think he's very talented. But what I was seeing in that fight on Vargas Garcia undercard was that he was too careless, and I was hoping, and maybe it's the case, at least I hope for him it's the case, and that is that he's just careless because he knows pretty well what level of the opposition he had in front of him on that given fight. And I was worrying, if he steps up in a competition, it is not going to look really well for him, for the exact reasons you mentioned. Sometimes he was way too easy to counter, and he was getting countered. I don't know. I do not remember if that opponent on that undercard I'm talking about was southpaw or orthodox, but he was catching him with either left or right hooks. I do not remember way too often. So for Madrimov's sake, I hope it's just the case of him not respecting the opponent that was in front of him, and that he will step up his game for the bigger fights.
Yeah, I think when you get a little bit of time, compare his performance in this fight. And I think the best performance I saw he had was when Golovkin and Rolls fought. He fought on the undercard because Golovkin is a big fan and believer in Madrimov, and that for me was a much better performance up against a veteran Gonzalez, because Madrimov was a lot more patient in his attacks. He didn't smother his work. There was a nice distance, and he was connecting a lot more poise, lot more balance, more sort of ingenuity in his attacks as well. And so that for me said that it's there with him in officially. I mean, he has it in his arsenal to do it. It could be a case of psychology, as we mentioned, maybe underestimating or excuse me, excuse me, given that he's looking to make a massive impression, given that he was an eliminator for a world championship, knowing that there's going to be PBC eyes, on the fight as now he moves into contention. And so therefore Al Heyman is going to have to negotiate with Eddie Hearn probably at some point as well. So it's always a case, they want to make a statement, but they say it's always the fight before their main fight, which is always their undoing, so let's hope not. But yeah, that's a journey, boxing fans should definitely follow with great deal of anticipation, because win or lose, he's going to put on a hell of an entertaining fights down the road. But yeah, that's all we'll say at the moment on Israel Madrimov the Dream. Definitely one of the best contenders out there now. All right, and well, we've been on for a hell of a lot longer than anticipated, but that was always going to be the way with our sort of approach. But What else we got? Mairis, Briedis, and Yuniel Dorticos. Good to see that this fight has been back on and official, and just sort of come out of nowhere. And you had to actually remind me that it's actually happening. And from what I can see, it's scheduled for the 26th of September. It's going to be for the IBF Cruiserweight Championship. So we've got the two beaten semi-finalists from the World Boxing Super Series the previous year. Both former champions as well. Great clash of styles here as well, official. Very highly anticipated fight. We got Briedis is what he's 26-1 with 19 knockouts, so good knockout power. And Yuniel Dorticos, he's what 24, 1 defeat. Obviously, semi-final in Russia against Murat Gassiev. Brilliant fight, absolutely brilliant fight. That was 22 by way of knockout. And don't know how much of you've seen of this season's World Boxing Super Series. Unfortunately, interrupted with the international lockdowns and the embargoes on sort of flights, transatlantic and sort of international flights. But so it was put on the back burner, sadly for us boxing fans. But it's opened up over in Latvia. Riga, Latvia. I guess that's where the fight is going to take place. Briedis, very indifferent official from what I've seen in this year's World Boxing Super Series. Yuniel Dorticos, I think at times he's looked a little bit better than what he was doing, than he's undoing against Murat Gassiev last year. Gassiev took the sting out of his punches with a beautifully calibrated, landing, counter punches, left hook, left to the body, singular punches initially, and then getting more and more progressively on his front foot, not on the back foot, up against the ropes, moving target, then accelerating, becoming a more prodigious force, and then just dominating the middle up until knocking him out in the 12th round. But Dorticos looked to me a little bit better when he fought against the Floyd Mayweather protege.
Tabiti, Andrew Tabiti.
Yeah, he was a lot. That fight definitely impressed me against a very small and more difficult target. It showed me the ability he has up against those sort of moving targets, because Briedis is not a big cruiserweight by in terms of sort of height standards, but he has fought up at heavyweight, and he does have knockout power at heavyweight, Manuel Char, but he tends to move quite well. Boxer sort of puncher, counter puncher on the front foot as well. Much like Murat Gassiev is a very good counter puncher on the front foot. One of the hardest skills in all of boxing. Good clash of styles. I don't know. With a jam-packed crowd in Riga, Latvia, Mairis Briedis is going to have, with a partisan crowd, he will definitely be the overwhelming favorite over there. But saying that, Usyk undid him over there, so Dorticos, with the power and the boxing ability I think he has, it's a 50-50 fight.
Yeah, I'd say so, but so I did not know that this final is going to play out in front of the crowd. That's interesting and a positive thing, It's always nice to see the fans, But speaking of Dorticos, I was as impressed in his performance against Andrew Tabiti as you was. But on the other hand, I don't think that his performance in that fight would necessarily translate into the finals against Mairis Briedis for the simple reason that those are not the same type of fighters. Because Andrew Tabidi, all he was doing was being, having a very low punching output and staying on the outside all the time. Uh, Unlike Briedis, who's able to box at all the ranges, and also, as we saw many times before, he can get very dirty, but he also likes to. I rate. I do think that he is a very dirty fighter, but at the same time, uh, I rate his ring IQ very highly, and he like I there's not a thing that I saw him that he's not able to do, and he likes to switch the ranges. So it may complicate the things for Dorticos. Now I know that when we were speaking about this fight around the time, around the time the rematch between Wilder and Tyson Fury was happening, you thought that Dorticos would win that fight, and yeah, it's I'd kind of say it's close to 50-50 type of fight, especially since Mairis Briedis is someone who, I mean, he's there in age, so we never know what version of him is going to show up. But what was constant from him in these last couple of years was that I got the feeling that he was not taking some fights very seriously, but whenever he was having a big fight in front of him, he was always very well prepared for that fight. So I mean, yeah, in fact, I do not remember the quarterfinals for this year's Super Series, World Boxing Series, however it's called. But if I'm not wrong, I thought that he lost his fight, or maybe I'm messing it up with some other fight. Anyways, I thought I thought he lost the quarterfinals, but then in half finals he was looking pretty sharp to me, much sharper than that against Glovatsky, beside what already happened. So I do think that Dorticos' chance may be he's relentless, because he showed a very high punch output, and he was not really fighting like what you would call a typical pressure fighter who pressures you and fights from on the inside or at mid-range. He was keeping his punches long. That is his preferable distance. But style-wise, if I do think if the sharpest version of Mairis Briedis shows up, I'd expect him to win, and deserves the victory, because while Dorticos is relentless, sorry, and so unlike your typical Cuban fighter, he's pretty much one-dimensional. So if Briedis can withstand his activity and pressure, I do think that he can counter him and get find a way to win the fight, because I saw Dorticos doing the same thing all the time. To me, he's, without wanting to diminish his skills, he's pretty skilled, pretty good at what he's doing, but he's a typical 1-2-3 fighter, left overhand, right, left hook, and such a cerebral fighter as Mairis Briedis, in my opinion, if he's well prepared in a top shape, he should be able to really deserve the victory. Now, probably, anyways, being that this fight is probably going to take place in his hometown, even if he does not deserve the victory on scorecard, and it goes full 12, he's probably going to get it. But if the sharpest version of him shows up for that fight, I do think he's really going to deserve the victory, or maybe even possibly stop Dorticos.
Yeah, I think the early sort of, I wouldn't even say a prediction, was based on the fact that I didn't know where the fight would be contested. I thought it might have been neutral, but on neutral grounds, or maybe even in the States. But Briedis definitely has the advantage if the fight is in Riga, no doubt. But we don't really know the condition of both fighters with this frustrating sort of lockdown period. You know, sometimes it's a case that these guys have already been training for 8 weeks, and then we have a 3-month lockdown. So they got to recalibrate, have a sufficient recovery period not to burn themselves out, and then get back on the wheel, so to speak. So trying to calibrate there and trying to peak for September, given the interruptions, is a, well, it's probably the first time that these guys have ever had to deal with this sort of invariable, this unknown factor with the pandemic and the respective decisions from sort of governments worldwide. So there's so many variable factors that I'm going to have to go back in, try and gauge what these guys have been doing during the lockdown. Look at sort of, look at the shape they're in. Now, I can definitely detect when the fighter is overcooked. I can see it if they disseminate their pad work and that, then I can definitely gauge that. And Dorticos tends to put out a lot of videos of his training, etc., what he's doing. So I'm gonna definitely try and analyze that and give you a more sort of definitive opinion or even some insight into what I see leading up to the fight. But we'll do that next couple of weeks.
Oh yeah, with great pleasure.
Yeah, and I think on that note, official, I think yeah, it was a great first session, and definitely want to acknowledge that we got a little bit of time as well. All of the people that were kind enough to devote some of their time on this Sunday, wherever they're domiciled around the world, to join us, for this first, podcast. So many of the usual suspects that we sort of interact with on all of the various platforms. Who we got? We got B Space. We had Pigeon earlier. We had Unrivaled, the Shepherd of Sons, Phil, Duck, St. Brit Sports. Who else have we got? Subash. Big Dan. Jeff. So yeah, we had a lot of people early on, but it's tapered down a little bit, maybe because of the duration of the podcast. But a big thank you to everybody who joined us at any point of the podcast. Apologies that we couldn't, acknowledge, your comments, or perhaps, answer some of the questions. It's difficult when you kind of get immersed in the discussions, and we mentioned that's the kind of way sort of, Official and myself operate, but it's at no sort of discourtesy to anybody. But in due course, as we reel off a lot more podcasts, we'll get a lot more interactive with the chat. A tremendous amount of knowledgeable people out there. A lot of them who operate their own channels have done, a great deal of work. Who we already subscribed, so we know them very well, and we acknowledge and take on board opinions as well. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of those guys, if not most of them, we already know them. We've been interacting with them on various podcasts, different social media groups, on Discord or whatever. And so, yeah, just like Corruption said, thank you for being here. Don't take it wrong for us not being able to really communicate a lot with you this time, especially since when we are alone here on the podcast, we are really looking to pay attention to what the other one is saying, because like you had the ability, you had the chance to hear. We are going into great details, so we like to pay a great attention to what each other is saying. And with that, I'd like to give big shout outs to channels such as Unravel Boxing Talking News, then Johnny Boy, what's his new channel name? Johnny Boy's Boxing Palace, but also Dell from Blue Collar Sport, and
Definitely.
Mike from Pound for Pound Boxing Report. Thank you all, guys, for
Hello to
joining me.
Gail and to Daniel and Jacob as well from the report that I've been a part of for the last sort of 6 years.
Yeah, great shout out to them. And remember, you can find us every Sunday at the same time. So I do not remember all the different time zones, but it's showing up on our homepage on YouTube, on the homepage of our channel. So thank you a lot for being here, guys. And Corruption, it was a great pleasure, and there are many more shows to come.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. So we'll be back same time next week, covering any significant fights from this Saturday's fight card in the United States. I don't think there was much happening of significant note in the UK, as well as previewing any fights the following week as well. So thank you all, and God bless, and we'll catch you all next week. Hope it was an immersive experience. So comments, feedback would be much appreciated. And on that note, sayonara all.